Today on the podcast, we have Jordan Porteous. Right? Did I get it right?
Yep, you got it. Yep.
Yes.
You nailed it.
Okay. So Jordan is an agent with Goosehead Insurance. Goosehead is an insurance broker, which allows Jordan to shop dozens of insurance companies for the best rates and coverage for his clients. And a lot of people, and part of the reason we're having you on the podcast today is a lot of people think that like when they got their driver's license or their first car, they've been using the same insurance company ever since, just on auto renewal, and they don't even think about it. But the reality is that you have so many options. And I think that especially now, like people who are very busy, like don't have the time. So they just don't even like think about going and shopping for different things. And that's why it's great to have somebody like you on their team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk through different things in the insurance world. I feel like you see all the commercials, you see all the advertising, but a lot of the details of the industry and what actually goes into the work that we do and the advice that we provide does not get talked about a lot. So definitely very excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah. And no offense, Jordan, but I think people think insurance is boring.
Yep.
And
welcome.
I know.
Well, yeah, insurance
exactly.
Boring.
But I think like there's two groups of people in the world, and people who like, you know, hate having to pay for insurance because it's like, oh, insurance. And then people who have had insurance like save them. Like save their lives, like seriously. Because like I've had a situation where like my insurance company like really, really helped me out during a bad accident. And like that's phenomenal. You know what I mean? Like, so now I'm like, oh yeah, you don't cheap out on insurance, or you don't, like it's important.
It matters.
It matters.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is one thing that we coach clients on a lot is when you are choosing who you're going to work with, both the agent, like the individual agent that's providing you advice, and then also the company and the contract that you're going with and the details of that. A lot of what we focus on is making sure that it's set up correctly. So if you God forbid, do ever find yourself in a situation like that, that the insurance contract and the company is going to step up to the plate for you. And if you haven't had one of those experiences, it can be hard to really imagine like, well, is that really ever going to happen to me? It's, I'm a pretty careful person, and no one ever expects to get into a car accident. No one ever expects to have something happen at their house that they can't, afford to fix on their own. So it's interesting that you've had an experience like that.
I mean, I wish we could show a video right now of, Grace, our executive producer on the podcast. She, her friend sent her a video up at their cabin just on Tuesday, and there was a really bad tornado, and like the windows blew out, and like of course you wouldn't think that would happen to you. No. But like, and I think especially like right now, very timely is like the weather we've been having. Especially in the cities, like you think about it up north, but you don't think about it down here.
Right.
And of course, there's a ton of other things that insurance covers you for.
Right. Absolutely.
So what do you say is like the biggest mistake that people make when they're choosing their insurance provider?
Yeah, really good question. I would say the number one thing that we talk to folks about, especially first-time home buyers, but really anyone this comes up with, is making sure you know what's actually covered and what the details of the contract are. One of the biggest, call it a myth, call it a misconception, whatever you may call it, is everyone has been always coached to, when they go to shop for insurance, price is the most important thing, and it's not. So when we look at insurance, there's three main buckets that we look at. First and foremost is, what are the details of the contract? So like you have a house, for example. Well, if God forbid the house caught on fire and burned to the ground, what's the actual dollar amount it needs to be insured up to make you whole? We need to make sure that that's reflected in the policy correctly. And then on from there, well, what's actually covered? Is it fire? Is it theft? Is it vandalism, wind, hail, things like that are going to fit your situation, the deductibles, the different details of coverage. And then lastly, we do look at price as a factor, making sure that we're getting you the most competitive rate. But I think with all the advertising, all that you hear all the time is switch and save, switch and save, switch and save. That's what we get every time on the TV ads, on radio, on internet. And so those are the questions that people think they're supposed to ask is, what's the rate I'm getting? What's the rate? What's the rate? And they're trained to hone in on that when it's a piece, but it's not the most important piece.
So most of the people who are listening to our podcast are in the real estate industry.
Sure.
Right. And you had kind of touched about it a little bit of like the most important to coach or train or teach first-time home buyers. So why is it so important for a real estate professional to have a strong relationship with you or any insurance provider, but with you?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. Talk about this a lot with the folks that we do partner with currently and branching out and things like that. The biggest thing is any agent is the clients that they are representing, they're providing an experience. How they are being, maybe on the first experience is it's by chance they had a lead come in, they had an introduction, they had a warm referral. But if that client's going to use them again, if they're going to buy a house, they're going to move, they're going to relocate, how they're going to decide to go back through them is based on the experience and the advice that they provide.
Totally.
The biggest thing with that is they have a very unique opportunity, an agent does, to be an advisor to the client. And any, quote unquote sales role that you can be in, what we always talk about, the thing that separates people that are somewhat successful and that are wildly successful is if you'll watch what they do and how they talk and how they interact with their clients, is they're advisors to their clients. They're not sales agents. They're not salespeople. They're advisors to their clients. So if you've ever, bought a car or a house or done anything and you go, man, that was a lights out experience, chances are you got good advice. You got expert advice. And being an agent, the reason it's so important to have an insurance agent that you work with when you are in real estate is that is part of the experience that you're providing. It may not be directly tied to what you're doing, the advice that you give, but if someone's buying a home, they get a mortgage, they need to get insurance, that experience is going to be related back to you no matter what, whether it was good or whether it was not so good. You best be sure that you want to control that experience to the best of your ability. So go ahead.
Well, I feel like people don't, they know that insurance is separate, but the thing is like for me personally with my purchase, it was like at the very end, like waiting for the insurance binder, freaking out. I had to call the 1-800 number. I had to wait on hold. I had to get called back by a bunch of different people. I have no idea who I spoke to. Like I've had a couple questions like since then, and I'm like, I don't know who I'm going to talk to, And I remember like the stress, like leading up to closing day. I mean, like I remember that it was like insurance, but typically like the client remembers just the stress. And it's like, don't have insurance be a part of that. That should be like the last thing that is stressful.
Right.
Well, and the other thing is that it's a value added for you or for the agent to try to give, because my experience is we just bought an investment property and no one guided us on who we should get for insurance. So we had to go out and do that, where it would have been nice to be like our agent to be like, okay, well, here's who I recommend, who's I've been using. You should try to sit down with them. Maybe like that's another value added proposition to give to your client, your buyer, at the end of the day, makes you look good.
100%. Yeah. And the thing that we talk about a lot is just being an advisor to your client. I mean, if you look at the people who, I always ask if you want to do a litmus test on if you're being an advisor to your client is like, Brooke, let's say you're an agent, and let's say the average house that, you buy or sell for your clients, let's say it's $300,000. Like that's kind of average, middle of the road for you for your sales, and you're a pretty successful agent. You sometimes make recommendations to a lender, to title, to insurance, to a mover, to other things, maybe 50 to 25% of the time. That's probably standard in the insurance industry. And you might think that you're being an advisor to your clients. But what happens when you get a referral that comes in that's 5 times the size of the average house that you sell? Are you still going to make that recommendation? Are you still confident enough to be an advisor to your client? Those are the times when I think people figure out whether they're being a true advisor or not. Is do you do the same thing every time? Are you confident enough in your process and the people that you're recommending? Is someone comes to you for real estate, for title, for mortgage, for insurance, to buy a car, they're not coming to you to, have a bunch of options set in front of them. They're coming to you to get expert advice. They're coming to you to say, what do you think I should do? Here's my situation. Here's my budget. Here's what I care about. Here's my family situation. Where should I go with this? give me advice. No one goes to the analogy that I always use is no one goes to their lawyer and says, hey, can you set up this company for me, or can you do my estate plan? And the lawyer, draws it all out in these contracts, and then they give it to the client. The client doesn't go, well, I don't think this is a good deal. We should do it like this and like this and like this. Well, no, they take the lawyer's advice, knowing their situation after having a conversation, because they're the expert. Mm-hmm. That's what clients are looking for. And that really just goes back to, why do you make a solid recommendation to title, to mortgage, to insurance? It's the same for us. So
I've actually never thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's very well said, because I'm gonna go, I don't want to try to be mean here, but it's no one likes the used car salesman pitch, right? In anything that you get to in any service industry, if you feel it, that's they're oh, that was kind of like a used car salesman experience, where it is advising you. I'm coming to work with you as my agent or loan officer because I don't know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I want the best advice on how to get through this transaction. And so if that recommendation is you, to work with you to get my homeowner's insurance, why would I not do that?
Yeah.
Plus, when you're going through the home buying process, you're looking at the house, you have to make a decision on a house. You have to make a decision on what your offer is going to be. You have to make a decision on oh yeah, maybe we're going to rip out these carpets. You have to make a decision on all of these different things. So being able to get rid of the decision fatigue by having people help.
Having it of a less stressful experience when it's already the biggest financial purchase someone's going to do.
Right. Yeah.
And what's crazy is how important insurance is. And you literally can't get the mortgage without it. And you know what I mean? They hound you about it. Mm-hmm. But it's the last thing people think about. Yeah. I feel like.
Yeah, it frequently is. And even to that, I think I'll go back to that example that I gave of if you're an agent who your average sale is $300,000 and you get something in that's 5 times that. The thing that's funny about that is everyone changes their behavior on the advice they give, the confidence in the recommendation. The clients that I have that are my biggest clients, those are the ones that want the expert advice the most as well, because the decision fatigue is a real thing. Mm-hmm. You're buying a house, you're moving, your kids might be changing school districts, you're doing an inventory of all the stuff that you've accumulated if you've lived in a place for a long time, which is way more than everyone thinks it is. Mm-hmm. The last thing that you want to do is go, oh man, there's 1,000 insurance companies out there. How do I decide? Or there's a ton of lenders, a ton of title companies. There's a ton of places I could buy a car from. Well, someone just wants a good recommendation and expert advice, and if they have a good gut feeling about it, they'll go with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel also too, with those higher end clients, like the luxury price point, you might say, is that group of people trust experts with everything. They hire personal trainers that tell them how to work out. They hire business coaches that tell them how to work. You know what I mean? They hire experts in every area of their life because they don't have the time and mental capacity. But who's to say that $300,000 client wouldn't be absolutely blown away by that level of experience? Mm-hmm. You don't have to be. Yeah.
100%.
I love that.
I think, when we really apply that to, not just the luxury price point clients, because that's really the service that we aim to give to everyone, is sometimes people are taken aback by just simple things like, hey, I'm going to answer my phone when you need something. Hey, let's walk through this together. And here's the things, from an insurance standpoint, at least, but you can do this with anything, is from an insurance standpoint, I say, hey, if you've ever had a friend or family member that's had a gripe with their insurance, here's the 3 or 4 things that it was about, and here's how we're addressing that. Let's walk through it together, versus, I ask you a few questions, and then 3-4 days later, you get something in your email, and I just say, hey, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, and we'll go from there, which is unfortunately most people's experience. So,
and also too, I don't know, if, I don't really know. Tell me if this is I'll just get into it.
Yeah.
You call. So, for example, I use Progressive, and I called Progressive because my insurance doubled. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what the hell, you know? And I called them, and they're like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this coverage? Do you want $15,000 for bodily harm or whatever? Something like that. And they're on a monitored phone line. Mm-hmm. And like, I get that, of course, but I can't be like, talk to me person to person right now. Like, tell me, what do you think I need?
Yeah. What would you do? What would you recommend if I was your daughter that like is the best thing for me?
Yeah.
That's what I like of like when in any services. If I was your daughter, what would you recommend for me to do? Don't upsell or charge me of all these things. And maybe it is the $5,000 package compared to the $2,000 package based on what I need. But like, what's the best for you?
100%.
And like, not that the people that work in call centers like aren't real people. They obviously are. But sometimes you get that feeling of like, is this a real person I'm talking? Like, can I talk to you like a real person?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to sometimes we get asked, what's the benefit of going through an agency like us versus going directly to some of those larger carriers? One, we're going to represent the vast majority of those big carriers, the ones that you see the TV commercials for, the Limu, Emus, the Progressives, things like that. The benefit of going through us versus going through them is you still get that personal one-on-one experience, and you still get the expert advice, but you get a choice model. So we're shopping. Most brokers have 20 to 30 carriers that they're going to be looking at. We operate on 150 plus, and we operate in all 50 states. So we're really going to be able to help clients with any situation that they're going to have. The other thing with that is we don't actually work for the companies that we represent. We have a relationship with them. We have many clients with those big companies. They do a great job when they fit those client situations, but we're not tied to them. And that's true for the sense of we are just acting in the client's best interest. And then also if their situation changes, we don't have to be stuck with them as well. And so it just gives us the autonomy to do what's really best for the client. And Lizzie, kind of what you mentioned is the litmus test that we always talk about, and that I explain to clients is we can always manufacture policy to be cheaper, to be more expensive, to be this, to be that, to include different things. There's so many options out there. What we look at is, and what I talk to clients about and what we teach is, if God forbid you close on this house next week and in 6 months you call me and you have a claim and a massive one, what are we going to be happy that we did today, right? Taking other things into account, taking your budget into account, taking into account that you don't plan for something like that to happen, but knowing that it could. How do we balance those two things? And I think you hit the nail on the head saying, well, what would you do for my daughter or your daughter, right? So
what would you say is the biggest misconception when it comes to insurance?
I think
loaded. Is that a loaded question?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think number one, that
price.
I would say price. I would say it has to be price. Reason being is again, like every single commercial that you've ever seen for insurance, it mentions price. It mentions, we and I don't want to say a tagline from any particular insurance company, but go down the line of the top 10 biggest ones and the billions of dollars that get spent on advertising, they're all price focused. And the way that we navigate people being price sensitive and the importance of, price is you have as many options as possible. So you're going to find someone who's going to be a good fit for that client coverage and contract wise, but also be competitive on pricing. I would say that's number one. And then number two, that, well, as long as I have coverage, as long as I have insurance, whatever happens is going to be covered.
But that's not
the case.
Not at all.
And that's where it's really important to have someone that's actually acting in your best interest and giving you expert advice. So certain misconceptions might be, you have a house, you have homeowners insurance. Well, are floods covered on homeowners insurance normally?
No,
they're not. Most people don't know that. Well, if you have a house, you have homeowners insurance. Do you have a wedding ring? Do you have nice watches? Do you have jewelry? A lot of people do, but did your agent ask about them? Did you put them on your policy? Did you put them on a separate one? Most people are probably listening to this or would hear that and go, ooh, no.
No, well, you should put your wedding ring
for
sure on insurance. But I don't have any of my other nicer pieces, which I don't have a lot, so don't come after me. But under there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think it's number one's price. Number two, that if I have coverage, it's all covered. It's all the same. It's not.
Well, also too, I'm like thinking about this because I have a condo and a townhome, and I'm like, ugh, I have no idea what my HOA covers versus my
Insurance.
Yeah, and I think, those are things that we walk through the clients a lot of looking at, what's covered by the HOA, what's not. Biggest difference between that is the HOA is basically going to cover the exterior of everything, and you're generally going to be responsible for what's on the inside. The really important thing with that that we see some clients run into that they don't think about, and this is a lot of this is going on in the state right now with the weather that we've had, like you mentioned, is a lot of those HOAs have massive deductibles. And so like 250,000, 500,000 plus, because they might have a roof that's $2 million on a condo association or townhome association. Well, where does the $2 million come from? It comes from the tenants. So if your policy is set up correctly, you have coverage for that, but a lot of people don't. And so what do they do when half the tenants can pay it, half of them can't? Is they still come around and hit everyone for the money usually. Yeah, exactly. So
Can you hit on, so let's say someone now wants to work with you, like they just maybe got in homeowners insurance and they're not very happy with the company or what the product is, or they've done some research and said, okay, maybe I'm not covered with everything. When can someone come to you to switch all of that? Like, is there rules on that of like, okay, not right? Or do you get, I don't want to, but like fined? Can the end person get like a little hit for moving?
Like if you cancel your cell phone bill early,
yeah,
you're like
your
oh
plan.
crap.
You're like, I gotta pay the remainder.
To pay like
balance.
$8,000.
Yeah. So that's where like trying to help with people who are listening to this is in trying to transition. Like you're with someone else and you want to transition. Maybe you can debunk that myth, or maybe it's true. You do get a little zing.
So in Minnesota, there are some states where there's some minor exceptions to this, but they're not in the Midwest. So that's going to mainly be like Florida is probably the biggest one, but in Minnesota, in the Midwest, any policy that you cancel, let's say you pay for the year in full and you only use 6 months of it, you're going to get 6 months of the premium back. You're going to get a prorated back for whatever you didn't use. And there's no penalty for switching. So you're gonna be refunded for everything that you didn't use. And there's absolutely no penalty for switching. Now, when we go to companies, if you're switching every 30 days and you do it 10 times in a year, there might be less options that look at that and say, well, this person switches, every 30 days. That might not be the most favorable business for us, but that's very, very seldom that people do that. So
yeah, that sounds like a pain in the butt.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if you're not happy, and you want to be able to switch.
Well, right now I'm thinking, because at our last HOA meeting, they were talking about like, because our insurance went up so significantly because of the hail damage over the last like couple years that like now our HOA dues are higher because our premium is higher, and which is just, it sucks. And we all have fire burning fireplaces, which is just like a huge issue. Apparently.
Yeah, liability.
Huge liability. But my thing is like when I called Progressive, and I knew you at the time, Jordan, so I feel terrible. I'm so sorry. But I like called them and they were like, we want you to stay with us because, you've been loyal since you were 16 years old. I've been having insurance with them since I was 16 years old, and now I have my condo and townhome policy with them. They were like, we don't want you to leave and then you're going to go to a different company and you're not going to have that like diamond level membership or whatever because you have this safe driving history and you have all this stuff. Like you're going to lose that. And then what happened?
Flo was talking to you.
Yeah. Accident forgiveness and things like that. I'm talking about car insurance now because car insurance is something that I feel like they think about car insurance more than they think about homeowners insurance, I feel like, but you do both, which is great.
Yeah.
But like, what is your rebuttal to that? Like,
yeah. So, and the reason most people think about their auto insurance a lot more than they do their homeowners insurance is because most people have their homeowners insurance escrow billed, so they don't see the bill most of the time. They see the auto draft for their car insurance every month or every 6 months. So that's why you're probably thinking about it more. As far as, you've been with us for 5, 10, 15 years, there are options for that on both ends of the spectrum. So there are companies that will give you some sort of slight benefit if you've been with them for a period of time, but there's also a really high chance or likelihood that if you've been with a company for 5 or 10 years, there may be someone else in your market as your situation has morphed and changed over time that's willing to offer you a much more competitive rate, because they're going to factor in, hey, you've stayed at the same company for 5 years. If you come to us, it's probably not very likely that you're going to change after 6 months. Hey, you have a really good driving record. Hey, you haven't made a ton of irresponsible, quote unquote, claims on your home policy. We really want your business too. Here's the coverage and the contract options that we're going to give you and the pricing that we're going to give you. And a lot of times, if you haven't checked on it in a long time, it may be more competitive.
So Jordan, oh, sorry, Lizzie, no. But you're going to get that information and you're going to present it to me like, here are the top 3 options.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice.
Do you do umbrella policies?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so that is one thing that we talk about a lot with first-time home buyers is everyone hears, my parents have an umbrella policy. I don't need one. I'm young. I don't have $1 million saved yet. Well, the thing that we're also looking to protect when, we issue an umbrella policy, and we always recommend it when someone's buying a house and if someone's eligible for it, is, well, you're young. You're in the time of your life where you're saving for your future. You're saving for your retirement. You just bought probably the largest asset that you're ever going to purchase, excluding, when you might move up in house size in a few years. What happens if someone comes after you, something happens, a judgment is received against you for $1 million or $2 million, and you might not have that in savings, but what do you have? You have a house. You have your ability to earn income, and your ability to earn income is seen as the same thing. So there have been judgments that have gone on where, let's say someone's making $100,000 a year, they determine they only need 60 to live. Where does the other 40 go to pay the judgment back? And so we're right back in the same situation of how can we protect against a situation like that when we live in a society that's highly litigious?
I think umbrella policies are like so important, and people don't realize that, because anything can happen in, even if you're like a young family and your son Johnny has over Matt, and Matt has an accident at your house, Matt's family is able to, in my understanding, Matt's family is able to come if it was like on your property. And so you have to have that to be able to, because obviously you want to help Matt if it was a very serious thing, but you know what I mean? Like, and protect yourself.
It's really important. 80% of the world's attorneys live in the U.S., and we have a highly litigious society, and that is a tool that we use to protect people when they're buying homes, when they're saving, when they have families, to make sure that if they do have assets that could be taken, that they've worked so hard to save things to build a life for their family, that they're not risking a large portion of that, or ideally any. And if they don't yet, if they're working their way towards that, we don't want that to be derailed, by just an accident that was, God forbid, a fluke or something happened, or, so-and-so came over and this happened, and, turn of events. So, yeah, I think it doesn't get talked about enough, because if people haven't had experiences where they understand the value of that, and then also just being frank, and this is, I think, something that the insurance industry as a whole could do a better job on, is they don't spend a lot of time on things that are complex but potentially not big money makers for people. And some people really might not like me saying that, but umbrella policies are quite cheap most of the time. Most of the time we're talking $20-$30 a month. As you might imagine, that's not a huge money maker for most agents, even if you're writing one for every single client, and it takes just as much time, and it's just as difficult as a conversation, a lot of times even more complex, the value of it, but it's important.
I would rather spend that $20 a month than then getting sued $3 million or whatnot, and not being able to have that money.
Well, this just happened to a family friend of mine. Their daughter has this dog that they adopted, and they had it out on a lead in their front yard, and a kid in the neighborhood ran up to the dog, pet the dog, and the dog bit the kid. And, next thing you know, a letter from the attorney from the kid's family to the dog owner. And it's like, you just don't know.
Right.
Like, you could also have the sweetest dog in the world, and they could, have a seizure and bite somebody. You just never know.
They get scared. They get spooked. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I just use that as an example because a lot of people have dogs, and I think that a lot of people don't understand like the risk involved sometimes, like with dogs, especially like adopting dogs. And I just say that because my dog has like ripped my arm open before, and my dog is terrifying. Not actually, she's very sweet, but like you just never know. And like that's something you don't think about with your homeowner's insurance. Like why would you think about, especially now that like the majority of first-time home buyers and so many millennials and now Gen Z are entering the home buying market. We don't think about that. Nobody teaches us that. Like, you know what I mean? Our parents, you know, have those things, but like, who's going to teach us?
Right.
So yeah, it's important to have an advisor.
Yeah. Back to the choice model, expert advice. You know, there's a lot of places in the industry where you might be able to get a piece of one of those. But we believe that there's really nowhere else that's offering both, where you truly get as much choice as you can possibly have, and have someone that's going to advocate for you. And there's, you know, that includes being prepared to give someone advice that's like not in your wallet's best interest, that, you know, hey, we might not be a good fit right now for you for this reason. You have a lot of recent claims, a lot of recent accidents, violations, whatever it may be. It's going to be too expensive to switch right now. I'd love to have your business, but in your best interest, it might work to stay where you're at right now, you know? So
For sure.
Where can people find you?
You can search Goosehead Insurance, followed by my first and last name, Jordan Porteous, gooseheadinsurance.com. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, I have a couple more questions.
Oh, okay.
Really quickly.
I'm sorry.
Because I'm just like, what are like the most, what are like some very common claims? Because I've never made a claim on my homeowner's insurance. Have you, Lizzie? Yeah. So like what do people make claims on?
Yeah, depends where you live a little bit with the weather stuff. As you'd expect on the home side in Minnesota, it's definitely going to be wind and hail is one of the most common up there. Other one, water is a really big one, both from the weather that we've had recently. So stuff seeping in from foundations, leaks in the roof and the siding and whatever it may be, you know, grading issues in the yard, water pools by the foundation, gets in through the egress windows, stuff like that. But also like pipe leaks, pipe bursting. So wind and hail and probably water are the most common ones that we see. And then on the auto side, it's depends.
Yeah, I feel like everybody's made an auto insurance
yeah,
claim.
right.
Like,
yeah, it's a lot more common. So because you have everything from I need a tow on the side of the road, had a rock chip in my windshield, to I got an a fender bender. So there's generally a wider range of things that people will make claims for, versus on a home it tends to lean towards larger dollar amount claims than autos. You're going to see a lot smaller claims on those things. So
what about like mold? That's kind of like an uncommon thing. It's not included in a lot.
It can be. It's often not.
Yeah.
So and it depends where it comes from too. So it depends. Did it come from?
So what if it comes from water though?
So again, depends where it comes from. This is where it comes in to have expert advice, because a lot of people would answer that and say, well, I have homeowners insurance. It's covered, isn't it? Well, it depends where it came from, and it depends what's in your contract, because you can have additional coverage for if it just comes out of nowhere, so to speak. There can be coverage in your policy if let's say you had like a water leak and you repaired the water leak, but 2 weeks later there's mold that shows up somewhere and you need remediation for that. If it came from somewhere else, you know, you can have coverage built in the policy for that. A lot of times it's not, or it's very limited if it is, if you didn't specifically have a conversation about it. So
yeah, and mold is terrifying.
yeah.
Really, really scary.
Yeah, it's no joke.
No. And remediation is really, really expensive and challenging as well.
Yeah.
So that's where I ask that, because I'm like, people don't think about that. Mold freaks me out. Like it's like one of my biggest fears.
Mold and dogs.
I know.
We're learning a lot about you today.
Yeah.
I love dogs, but dogs can bite you, and they can bite kids. So that's my whole thing.
Any other pressing questions for me?
Well, the reason I ask that is just because I feel like people are like, oh, well, my house isn't going to start on fire. Like, yeah, that would suck.
Yep.
But like, luckily I have homeowner's insurance. But like, also, what does that even mean? What does your homeowner's insurance mean? I think my coverage for my my townhome, I think, is like $60,000. I really have to think about that. And I'm like, it would cost way more than $60,000 to rebuild my house.
Right.
Especially right now.
$75 to $100 a square foot, probably on the low end. So if it's 1,000 square feet, probably minimum. I wouldn't go under, 75, 80. Not a recommendation I'm making to people, but just general ballpark. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Sounds like you need to meet with Jordan.
Sounds like I need to meet with Jordan.
Of course.
Sounds like everybody needs to meet with Jordan.
Yes.
Because let's be real, like who listening to this podcast can actually look in the mirror and tell themselves that they like got a grip on their insurance situation?
Yeah, not me.
Not me.
And I'm on it.
Well, thank you so much, Jordan.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome.